So the subject of this short video is pesticides and other chemicals that have an effect in the ecosystem. But pesticides is a broad word we use for any chemicals that are used in farming to control different pests. This could be herbicides, which is used to control growth of plants we don't, insecticides, which are used against insects, or fungicides, which are used against fungi. But in general, these are chemicals we use to reduce the impact of a pest in a farming environment, and this is something that usually happens on our large monocultures or in greenhouse production. Now, the use of pesticides is something that has only been really big for the last 70 or 80 years, because with the rise of the very large monoculture farming, we also see that diseases or pests spreads very quickly. If you have a huge monoculture of only one plant, if a disease can hit it, it can usually spread very quickly, and then the farmer needs to do something if he doesn't want to lose a large amount of his production. Also, insects that feed on a specific plant in a monoculture will have very little limit to population growth, so like a grasshopper or a caterpillar or a beetle who feed on this kind of food source will be able to multiply very quickly and then have a large effect on the crop outcome. So pests of this kind can really reduce the output of a monoculture, and use of pesticides can then help to limit the loss to the farmer. But as with everything else, there is a good and a bad side to this, and I'll come into that later. So what's good and what's bad about the use of pesticides? Well, the obvious good part is that it increases the crop output. Normally, stuff like insects will be able to eat a large amount of the crop, and by using pesticides there is a much larger output for the farmer. This means a larger economical gain for the farmer. In many parts of the world, it also will affect food security. It will be easier to have enough food for the large human population. So from the standpoint of farming output, the use of pesticides is a good thing. The bad side is that it can tend to kill off other species than the one you target. You might want to kill a specific beetle who affect your crop field, but that insecticide you spread could also affect honeybees or other insects we like to have in our environment. Some of them can also be harmful to humans. This can be either directly, people who work with the pesticides can get sick, or it can be indirectly, that they can over time accumulate and make us sick. And the last thing is they can lead to what we call biomagnification in the food chain. This is very famously what happened with DDT, which is a very good insecticide. It kills all insects, but when it accumulated through the food chain, it also became dangerous for other species. We'll look at this later. Okay, now I'm trying to explain the process of biomagnification here. In this case here, I'm going to use pesticides as an example, but biomagnification can also happen with heavy metals and with other poisonous chemicals. This could be bromines and other stuff we waste from industrial use. So the entire concept is, if we have a chemical or a heavy metal that can't be broken down by the organism, it will tend to accumulate along the food chain. So here I'm trying to draw a badly drawn food chain. Here we have a crop. That crop we now spread with some pesticide to keep some caterpillars off destroying it. So on the crop, that might be a very, very small concentration, 0.0001 gram per kilo. That'll be a very small concentration of the chemical. Now, another beetle would like to eat at this crop as well, and due to the rule of 10, that only 10% of the energy and the carbon moves on the food chain. We talked about that earlier. You're going to need about 10 kilo of crop to make 1 kilo of beetle. That is approximately, but around that ballpark. That means that if the chemical can't be broken down, the beetle will accumulate a larger amount of chemicals. So there might be 0.001 gram per kilo of chemical in the beetle. Now the beetle gets eaten by a small songbird, could be a sparrow, and because of, again, the small songbird needs about 10 kilo of beetle to make 1 kilo of songbird, we will end up with 0.01 gram of the pesticide in the songbird. Now the sparrow, unfortunately for the sparrow, gets eaten by a raptor, a huge bird of prey, and again, because of the 1 to 10 rule, it will accumulate to now have 0.1 gram of the pesticide in the bird of prey. While this amount here might be so small that it doesn't affect the organism, again here it might be so small it won't affect the organism. As we keep accumulating, we can get to levels where it might actually affect this organism in a negative way. Although this pesticide that was spread here was supposed only to work against caterpillars, at this high concentration it might end up affecting the survival of the raptors as well. Here we see an example of biomagnification of mercury. Mercury is a heavy metal that we can't break down, which means if we get mercury into a fatty tissue, it will stay there. Our body has no way of breaking it down. So even though there is a very low mercury concentration in water and a very low in plankton, as we get into insect eating fish and fish eating fish, this mercury concentration rises. Which also means that if we humans here in this system are the apex predators, we will eat fish with a high concentration of mercury, which will lead to a high concentration of mercury in humans. And this is one of the reasons why we say it's important for women who are pregnant to be careful about what type of fish they eat, because a developing infant is very sensitive to mercury. So this is a case of where our own pollution ends up hurting ourselves in the end. The last couple of years there's been a large focus on plastic pollution. Plastic in itself is a problem because the amount of it. When we throw out a plastic bag or a plastic spoon or whatever, and we don't throw it in the garbage, it tends to find its way into streams, and from there it finds its way into the ocean. Now the ocean is mighty big, but the amount of plastic we pour into the ocean has now made plastic a problem because it doesn't break down easily. That is one of the smart things about plastic. That's why we use it, because once it's made, it's very stable. Well, the same thing that made plastic very good in our kitchen makes it very bad in the ocean, because once it is there, it will take many 100 years to break down. And these plastic here then might end up in the food chain. It can get eaten by fish that can damage the fish, and piece of plastic can also limit the growth of turtles, and other animals can choke on them. So again, our waste products, the plastic here, ends up becoming a problem for the whole ecosystem. And we can now see that plastic in the marine environment is a huge and rising problem, and the best way to stop this problem is by limiting at the source. Mainly, don't throw plastic in nature. The last type of pollution we're going to talk about is female hormones. And this is a little different. But female hormones have been used since the 60s, 50s or 60s as birth control, also known as the pill. It's quite smart because it's an easy way to manage birth control. The problem is it will find its way from the toilet into sewage. And we can see that animals exposed to this can be affected, as a female hormone in the pill will block testosterone receptors in these animals, which can lead to deformities. And we see that fish who are exposed to female hormones the male guppies, for example, will start changing behavior and be less aggressive in their mating behavior. So this can affect fish, but it might also affect us humans. We do see that in humans we have found a lower sperm count developing over the last 20-30 years, and scientists struggle to figure out why that is. We don't know if it is from hormones from the pill, if it's chemicals from plastic, chemicals from electronics, pesticides or something else, but we do know there is some kind of environmental effect that limits the fertility of men, especially here in the West. So again, sometimes the pollution we spread in the environment end up coming back and hurting ourselves.